Welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast. My name is Valerie, and today we have a bonus episode. I want to thank everyone who has reached out to me about my last episode. It was honestly incredibly liberating to begin to share my story, and I'll be honest, there were many traumatic details that I did end up leaving out. I think part of it was in a subconscious effort to forget and honestly not relive a lot of the memories. I feel like a lot of the trauma would have been deeply triggering to our listeners, although I think more of the details might come up further as we progress. So today, I will be honest, I had actually just got done donating plasma earlier. I'm a little winded, but everyone else is out of the house, and I'm in my office, and I figured it was a perfect time to record our bonus episode and maybe our next episode as well, because batch recording is super helpful, especially on days I have extra time. That way, I don't have to worry about getting the next episode out on schedule, so that way I can just focus on editing, which is nice. Earlier today, I had donated plasma, and then I went to pick up a little milk tea drink to kind of wake me up a little bit, and some food. And I'll admit, I was feeling a little bit out of it. Honestly, wasn't really having the best day. And it's funny, I was ordering some poke, and the lady was super helpful. Had me try samples, and then finally we got on the topic of, she asked if I had my blood drawn, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did. And she's like, oh, did you donate blood? I'm like, well, actually I donated plasma. And she's like, oh wow, that's a really awesome thing to do. I'm like, oh yeah. And I was just feeling so out of it, and she's like, oh, would you like, I know you gotta stay hydrated, would you like a lilikoi passion fruit juice on the house? I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And, if you've ever been into, like, a poke place, it's those, like, little, those cans that, like, they have lilikoi, they have orange guava, those types of drinks that, that are very also common in Hawaii. That we have them all over here in California. I'm not sure about other states, but, like, they're super common here as well. So I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And she was super nice. It was almost like a breath of fresh air, because I was just not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but I wasn't having the best day. And it was just like that ray of light, like when you're just having the worst day and like something, just the littlest thing, like happens to kind of turn your day around. That's basically what happened to me. And she was just so nice. I don't even know if she could tell I was feeling like upset at all, but she was just so nice. And I'm like, oh, what a nice gesture, And I just wanted to share that, because sometimes, it's just the little things. And I was actually telling someone recently that when being asked, like, how do I deal with this time, like, from having a bad day, and I honestly think, like, even if, like, it just seems like nothing else could go wrong, I try to focus on the one thing that may have gone right. And it can be anything. It could be the coffee you made that morning. Maybe it was extra good, or, in this case, it was just a super nice cashier. Maybe she had no idea what was going on, but, like, she offered me a free drink, just because I had gotten done donating earlier, and I never expect anything, and but you have this, you have the gauze and stuff wrapped around your arm, so sometimes people notice. So yeah, she was super super nice. So I wanted to just, like, super off chance that she'd ever be listening to this podcast, but thank you so much for making my day a bit better. And it's just, those are the things I like to focus on, even when it just feels like maybe everything else is going wrong. Okay, so enough of that detour. This bonus episode is going to be about sexuality, and, we will get into different, none of my episodes are going to be graphic or anything like that, but, it is going to be an honest conversation around sexuality. So if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, I would advise clicking out and skipping this episode. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. I think we are going to talk about sexuality in terms of a broader scale, and as well as my personal experiences. And I was actually inspired to do this episode after some feedback about my last episode, and I know a lot of people in my life were shocked about some of my revelations, and it was to be expected. Because literally only like two people knew in my personal life. There are some really close-knit friend groups that I'm in that I've, people who are of similar interests and backgrounds who also may know. But as far as my personal life, only maybe less than a handful of people knew about the fact that I am bi. And there are several different types and layers of bisexuality. And I don't want to spend the whole podcast picking those apart because, there are some things that I am honestly still learning. I will be completely transparent. I am still learning a lot of, the different sexuality types and what they mean. But, for Mike, in this total disclaimer, I'm still ignorant about a lot of different types of sexualities, genders, all that. So, I'm still learning. I'm a millennial. I was raised in a very heteronormative upbringing. In terms of everyone that I knew or that was close to me was straight or straight presenting, or I had no idea that, about their sexuality. I will say I was raised in the Bay Area. It's a very diverse area, but even back in the late 90s, early 2000s, things were very much different than they are today. That was 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. Things were very different. And I think that shaped me a lot versus had I grown up more within maybe the last 10 years, if I was a Gen Z, maybe things would have been a little bit different. I don't know. But yes, so I feel like it took me a while to come out because I was raised in a very heteronormative environment and because I did not have or didn't know anyone who was on the LGBTQ spectrum. There wasn't a whole lot of representation. We know what straight is. I think we knew what, what gay was, what it meant to be gay. But other than that, that was it. We didn't know about, I didn't know about this whole spectrum. Things, I'm still learning about things like biromantic. We did know about something called bi-curiosity. And growing up for me, some of my early indicators of being bisexual were discovering, or at the time I didn't know, but as I said, I had a crush on my 5th grade teacher who happened to be a woman. I never talked about it because I just felt like I was weird. I didn't know what that meant or what, that bi was a thing. I mean, this was in the late 90s. I didn't know. And I didn't even dare mention it to anyone just because it's school's already hard. It's already a hard time. I was dealing with trauma in my home life, being bullied at school. So it's I didn't want to add one more thing to my struggles. So I kept it to myself. As I grew older, I discovered I had a crush on Gillian Anderson from The X-Files. I thought David Duchovny was also hot, but I'd never admitted it, but I had a crush on both David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. And even now, I think, when folks ask, hey, who's your childhood crush? I would just maybe name David Duchovny, or people would just assume that David Duchovny is the one I was crushing on, right? They would just naturally assume that it was a guy. But I've had a crush on Gillian Anderson probably since I was about 10 or 11 years old when I started watching The X-Files. Didn't really think much of it. I mean, I guess at the time, I didn't I didn't really know that there was like a label, I guess, so to speak. And I know people have different feelings and thoughts on labels, and there's good and bad in both. But, and then I got into Sailor Moon, and there was a couple that was a lesbian on the show. And I love to write about them. And I went through a period of time where I'm like, well, maybe I'm lesbian. I don't know. And then I will be getting to this in my next episode. But then, I met my boyfriend, my husband at the time. And I'm like, well, I can't be gay because obviously I like guys too. And of course there were like anime characters and other teachers that I had a crush on too that were guys. But at the time I'm like, okay, it was just so incredibly confusing because I didn't really. There still is a lot of something called bi-erasure, and that will be something I will get into as well. But I remember in my early mid-teen years, I remember casually mentioning to my parents, what would you think if I also liked women? And my mom thought, oh, well, maybe you're just bi-curious. Now, I think definitions have also kind of changed and evolved as well. And to her and to many other folks, bi-curious just means that you are curious about, having relationships with someone of the same sex or same gender. And now there's kind of a different definition that I learned about it. And there's something else also called biromantic. And there's also something called asexuality. My mom literally thought, and this was like probably 15 years ago, thought asexuality meant that you like to have sex with yourself. And of course I'm like, no, that's not what that meant. That's not what that means. That has another meaning. But anyway, I will get into some of the things I've learned about definitions of sexuality a little bit later. And it sounds like there's like a wedding at a house that's nearby me that's going on, so I apologize if there's like any background music. I unfortunately cannot control that. But yeah, so I think it was around the prepubescent teenage years that I was kind of going through this. I also remember casually mentioning it to my dad, like, what would you think if I was gay? And he said, well, I would be a little disappointed. And so it never came up again. A lot of my grandparents were very conservative. So I knew that was just something that I was never going to talk about. And even just my brother and I being my brother and I being the first ones on my mom's side of the family to be in interracial relationships and marriages was already shocking. My husband's half Filipino. But it was still shocking to my grandparents, even though like I had grown up and was raised in a very diverse area. And, but yeah, things like that were still shocking to them. Like, so that's just something I didn't talk about. And even my own immediate family, I never talked about it. And when my husband and I started dating, I just kind of felt like, oh, well, because a lot of people will, of course say, oh, well, it's just a phase, I got told that about, not wanting kids too. Oh, it's just a phase. You'll want kids someday. You'll have kids someday. When I basically knew at 12 as well that I never wanted to have kids of my own. I'm 33 now. I still don't. But at the time I thought, okay, well, I guess maybe I will reach that magic age when I will want to have kids. That did not happen. So that's a lot of times what people will say. It's just a phase, blah, blah, blah. So at the time, and also not really having that representation, I kind of just didn't I didn't really talk about it or think about it anymore, especially after I started dating my husband. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe they were right. I'm clearly not gay. So I just never talked about it. Even though, like, I really enjoyed exploring and writing about, characters in same-sex relationships. My family thought it was a little bit weird. But I guess I just never really explored it beyond that. And another common misconception is, even for me too, before I even knew that bisexuality was a thing, like when we see a same-sex couple or a gay couple, you think, oh, they're both gay, or they both must be gay. When that's not necessarily true. One of them could be bi. Both of them could be bi. You don't know. And that was just a big realization for me. Because there's a lot of assumptions that we project. And as I said, I'm still learning. I don't want to offend anyone, with my ignorance, because I'm still learning a lot of different things. But fast forward probably until about 5 or so years ago, I was watching another video about a gal who had come out as bisexual, and there was just an epiphany, a light bulb moment, where I realized that, I'm bi too. Like it just came full circle. Now I know a lot of people who listened to my last episode, they're like, what? Like, just like all of a sudden, like one day she, like she just came up with this. Like, no, like it was a series of events. It was something I didn't talk about. And because I am what I've come now to learn as something called straight presenting. Straight presenting is someone who appears to be straight. It could be a man, a woman, whatever gender, who appears to be straight. And I feel like my experience, might be different than someone who's not straight presenting. And I think that's one of the reasons why I never talked about bisexuality when I was younger. Again, as I said, I was had a very traumatic home life, and a very difficult time in school as well. It was just one thing that I kept to myself. It was a secret, sort of. But I remember the first person I told, and it was my husband. I told him, I'm bi. I'm pretty sure I'm bi, and this is why I think I'm bi. Or these are the things that I've learned, and not that I was looking for his validation, but I was looking more for, his support. And to my surprise, he wasn't really shocked by it. I told him why and how I came to this conclusion, and that it's been something that, goes back to my childhood, but I never really dove into as I got older and after I met him. And now a lot of people, when you come out, or quote unquote come out, especially something, like being bi, a lot of people think like, oh, so does that mean that you need to go and have have sex or have a relationship with someone of the same gender? I'm like, no, not at all. And one of the things that I learned was you can have a very happy and fulfilling relationship with your partner and be bisexual. And all that bisexual means, from what I've learned, is that you just are attracted to more than one gender. That's all it means. And you can be perfectly happy and satisfied with whomever you're with, but it just means that you're attracted to more than one gender. And that's it. And having that realization just came full circle to me, because I remember as I grew up, learning more about bisexuality, but I still hadn't come to the conclusion that I was bi, because I always thought if you're bisexual, you have to 50% of the time like women and 50% of the time like men. That's what I thought bisexuality was. Thought it was like you have to like men and women like equally. And it wasn't until I learned that there was a whole spectrum of bisexuality that I realized that there was somewhere inside of there is where I fit. And the truth is that you can be bisexual and maybe 25% of the time be attracted to women and maybe 75% of the time attracted to men, or like be predominantly attracted to men, but maybe somewhere in there you're also attracted to women as well. And I think that's where a lot of confusion happens for folks, because, you know, here's where also the bi-erasure comes in. But how do you know you've never been with a woman? And my answer to that is, if you are a straight person who's never been in a relationship at all, how do you know you're heterosexual? How do you know you're straight? You've never been in a relationship. You don't have relationship experience. How do you know you're straight? It's the same thing as someone who is bisexual and in a heteronormative relationship. And the facts are that about 86% of bisexuals are in a heteronormative relationship or in a heterosexual relationship. So does that mean those folks are not bi? No, of course not. You can, you know, you are as valid as someone who is bisexual in a gay relationship or in a heterosexual relationship. You are just as valid. But bi-erasure, well, can happen all in the straight community. You know, you have, you know, folks say, well, how do you know you've never been with someone of the same sex? How do you know you're bi? And it can also happen in the gay community, where they feel like, well, you're not gay enough. You're in a heterosexual relationship. What do you mean you're bi? So I think, in a way, I don't want to demean anyone else's experiences. I can only speak for myself. But in a way, I feel like being bisexual is more complicated than being gay. Because of that. Because of the bi-erasure that happens. People aren't taken as seriously. You know, if you're in a relationship with the opposite sex, they're like, no, you can't be bi. And so I want to talk about bi-romantic, bi-curiosity, and bisexuality. Now, from what I have come to learn about the difference between being bisexual and being bi-curious, is that in bisexuality, as I said, you can be completely 100% confident in the relationship that you're already in. You don't feel like you need to go and have an experience with someone of the same sex. Bi-curiosity could eventually lead into bisexuality, but is kind of more of a questioning. I feel like it falls more under the Q and the LGBTQ questioning, because you aren't 100% sure of your sexuality, whereas bisexuality, you were confident about being bi. Now, at one point in time, I feel like I fell under the Q category, especially in my younger years. I definitely fell under the Q. And then it wasn't until I was older, and I honestly, I'll admit, I did like a Google search, because I'm like, you know, when you hear about people coming out, it's usually around, you know, when they're younger. You know, preteen, teenage years, things like that. Of course, you know, there's a couple exceptions to that. But I'm like, can someone come out like in their late 20s, early 30s, you know? And it seems silly to me now, but yeah, like if for anyone who may be listening to those podcasts, the answer is yes, you can come out anytime in your life. And again, I don't feel like I need to broadcast about being bisexual, but there is something that is completely liberating about feeling the 110%, you know, feeling at 110% at ease with yourself, knowing who you are inside. And really, I think that's the most important part, knowing who you are and accepting yourself. I feel like that needs to come before expecting the acceptance of anyone else, because let's be honest, there might be people in your life who may not entirely accept it or accept you or believe what you're saying. But there is something liberating about just feeling, everyone knows, like, oh, I can just be me. I'm not weird, There is something to be said about that. Now, another thing, let's talk about biromantic. So biromantic is similar to asexuality in the sense that biromantic is like bisexual, but without the sexual component. Now, if you're in a biromantic relationship, you are in a relationship for ingesting the romance. You have everything but the sex, and that's similar to asexual, because asexual means you have no sexual desires. So in a biromantic relationship, you may be romantically involved with someone of the same sex or same gender, but not have the physical component, the sexual component. So it is similar in that way. And that, there are so many, there's also aromantic, and that could be in a heterosexual relationship too. You can be romantically fulfilled by someone of the same or opposite gender, but not feel the need to have the physical or sexual component. So that's what I've come to learn about the definitions. Of course, everyone thinks and may have their own unique perspective. Again, I just want to reaffirm that I'm still learning. But I am completely confident who I am. And there are a lot of misassumptions now. Actually, my mom and I had a talk at length about it. Previous generations had, when they think about bisexuality or bi-curiosity, have different definitions or what they were taught certain things meant. For example, bisexuality, to a lot of maybe Gen X or boomers, think that, you need to go have a physical relationship with the same sex to be considered bi. But it's just like, when you think about it, I have friends who have no relationship experience. That's like telling them that, hey, how do you know you're heterosexual? You've never been in a relationship. That's the same exact thing, that you're doing to someone who, or saying to someone who is bisexual. Because you don't, all it means is you're attracted to more than one gender. That's all it means. And doesn't mean that you need to like, oh yeah, I need to have sex with the same sex partner. Doesn't mean that at all. Now that's my own personal understanding of it. And so I think that's where the struggle is, especially with bringing awareness. I'd say I'm a pretty forward-thinking person. Again, I was raised in a very heteronormative society, so there's a lot of things that I am still learning, and so I'm still shocked by, and I feel like we all can be ignorant to some extent, but it's, are we open to learning new things as time progresses? Because essentially I feel like, as times progress, we're always learning. It's just like, when at the beginning of coronavirus, we didn't think that, masks were effective, and then science came out, masks were effective. It's ever changing. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, but you said this 1 minute, and now you're saying this, and how do you know? And so my aim is not to get political here, but you get what I'm saying, that things are ever changing. And as we move with the times, like, we're facing a plethora of new information, and we're always learning. And I'm still always learning. and about the definitions to things, and what it means to be part of the LGBTQ community. And, you know, having more than two genders, always different things that I'm learning. So that has been my experience. But yeah, it was completely liberating and validating for my husband to accept that information. And, you know, he's still learning it too, of course. But thankfully, he comes from a very progressive family and background that he didn't think anything differently of me. But I kind of had a sense of how a lot of other people would react to that. And I hope that this episode helped kind of clarify some things and like helped you to learn, if you or even someone in your life who's coming out as bisexual, to be more supportive in how you can help them. There is also something very similar to bisexuality called pansexual. Now, there are still evolving definitions about pansexuality as well. Now, pansexuality is, I think it's similar to demisexuality. So demisexuality, and at first I thought I was demisexual because for me, I need an emotional connection with the person. Basically, it means you need to have an emotional connection before having a physical relationship. And I believe that can go with bisexuality, heterosexuality, no matter what, that's what that means. It could be to anyone. Now, pansexuality is similar in a way that a lot of people intertwine bisexuality and pansexuality as attraction to more than one gender. For me, I mean, it could always change. I don't like to say, I don't like to speak for future me, but I feel solidly bisexual and confident in the fact that I am bisexual. Now, a lot of folks identify as pansexual, meaning you can be attracted to anyone regardless of their gender. You could be attracted to someone who's trans. You can be attracted to someone who is gender fluid and doesn't identify as male or female. There's more diversity in pansexuality, meaning you could just be attracted to anyone regardless of gender. Now, that is my understanding of the difference between pansexuality and bisexuality. I know some people may agree, some people may disagree, because things are just ever changing. But that is my understanding of the differences between pansexuality and bisexuality. I don't believe I am pansexual, at least not in this moment of time. I feel like I am solidly attracted to both men and women and not beyond that. But again, that could always change as definitions are changing, people are changing, we are very fluid. I'm always learning about myself. I'm always learning I'm discovering new things. For example, I used to be 100% a t-shirt and jeans girl. 100%. Tomboy, t-shirt and jeans. Probably up until about the last 5 or 6 years. And when I discovered how much more comfortable wearing just even a casual dresses compared to wearing jeans and shorts, I was forever changed. I was swayed. I went on to the dresses camp. I'm like, wow, these are so much more comfortable. And yeah, so I am no longer a t-shirt and jeans guy. I honestly hardly ever wear jeans anymore. I never thought that would happen. I was always like a t-shirt and jeans girl. Shorts, tank tops. I still do wear tank tops sometimes, but I don't really wear jeans or shorts too much anymore. And then during the wintertime, fall, I love my hoodies, my oversized tops, long sleeves with leggings, sue me. Fall's coming up, and yes, I am a pumpkin spice gal, although I do like pumpkin flavored things, but I also really love apple flavored things as well, pretty equally. I don't like Uggs. Overpriced. But you know, some can say I'm a basic white girl. I don't know. So I'm not crazy about pumpkin pie. Maybe I'm just tired of it, but I love discovering pumpkin cookies. Oh, so good. Pumpkin cookies are the best. I think I discovered those probably about 6 or 7 years ago. Better than pumpkin pie, in my opinion. But I do really like pumpkin, but I'm just kind of like, pumpkin pie is okay. It's not like the greatest thing ever, you know. And like, I'll be honest, as someone who used to work at Starbucks, I think Starbucks is overpriced and the coffee's not great. So I wouldn't say I'm even a pumpkin spice latte gal. I wouldn't even say that. I'm a boba gal, you know. If you know me, you know me, I'm a boba gal. But yeah, so I hope that helped put some things into perspective for you, someone in your life who may be going through something similar. I thought this would be a fun bonus episode to kind of dive into sexuality. Things are always changing. I'm still learning things about myself, but it has been incredibly liberating to just be who I am and not feel like there's something weird or wrong with me, and meet fellow like-minded women who are in that camp. And I think bisexual men are also a very strongly unrepresented group. And maybe because of societal expectations and norms, you don't hear as many of them be as forward about being bisexual, as you do gay men. But they exist as well. But remember, about 86%, I believe that was a statistic that I looked up, of bisexual people are in heteronormative relationships. And just because you don't have relationship experience, it doesn't mean you're not bi, gay, heterosexual, whatever. It just means who you're attracted to. That's it. Period. Exclamation point. And for those of you listening, you are just as valid as anyone else under the LGBTQ community. Just as valid. And you can also be bi and be attracted more to women than men. Again, as I said, it is a spectrum. You can be bi and attracted to men more than women. Doesn't mean you aren't bi. You are still 100% completely bi and valid. And you also can be attracted to maybe 75% it is women, maybe 50%, maybe it is 50-50 for you. It is a whole spectrum. And I think that is the light bulb moment that went off for me. Like, you know, it's a spectrum. And somewhere on it, like, you can fit in and are completely valid in your feelings. So if you are having a confusing time like I did, just wanted to let you know you are loved, valued, no matter what anybody thinks. You are loved, valid, and accepted. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you for sticking around with me, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.